I was blindsided by my mother-in-law's secret deal with my father before the wedding. Unknowingly, I walked into a trap. My honeymoon dream turned into a nightmare when she burned my passport and whisked my husband away to Switzerland. But little did they know, I had a surprise in store, $200 million in losses that would destroy everything they built. My name is Chloe, and I'm 29 years old. Looking back, I never imagined my life would take such a dramatic turn. I've always come from a family that had its own fair share of success. My father, David, is a well-known businessman in our city. He runs a firm that has earned respect over the years, and his reputation is solid. He's always been the type of man who focused on building relationships, whether it was through his business or personally. One of his closest allies for the last few years has been a woman named Carla. Carla, who runs her own company, is a powerful businesswoman. She's got a reputation of her own, determined, sharp, and never one to back down from a challenge. My father and Carla had worked together on many deals over the years. They were more than just business partners. They were friends, or at least that's what I thought. I grew up with a deep respect for Carla because of her strength, and I admired how she carried herself. Her company, though successful, wasn't without its struggles. But she always made sure she kept things moving forward no matter what. One day, after a few years of their friendship, my father and Carla decided to take their business relationship to the next level. Their idea was simple. Why not merge their personal and professional lives? They agreed to arrange a marriage between me and Carla's son, Luke. My father thought it would be the best decision for both our families, strengthening our ties, merging our businesses, and ensuring that everything would grow seamlessly. Now, I had known about Luke for a few years, but we hadn't really spent much time together. We were more like acquaintances than anything else. But then, about 6 months before the wedding, we started getting to know each other. I remember our first few conversations. They were simple and casual, mostly about the business and how our families would benefit from the union. Luke was charming, handsome, and, to be honest, he had a way of making everything seem perfect. He was 32, and even though we had only been together for a short time, he made me feel like we were a match made in heaven. At first, I didn't mind the arrangement. It felt like the natural next step for me, given the history between our families. I didn't feel pressured into the relationship at all. In fact, Luke seemed genuine and kind, and I trusted that he had the same intentions as I did, to strengthen our family's legacy. We both agreed to the marriage, and everything moved forward smoothly. My father was overjoyed, Carla seemed pleased, and Luke and I slowly began planning our future together. But the moment we said our vows and exchanged rings, something inside me began to shift. It was as though a veil had been lifted, and the reality of our situation slowly began to dawn on me. I wish I could say I saw it coming, but the truth is I didn't. The changes started small, barely noticeable at first, but they began to pile up. My mother-in-law, Carla, was always a bit overbearing, but soon after the wedding, I realized how controlling she could be. I began to notice how everything, from the smallest decisions to the largest ones, seemed to have her stamp on it. It wasn't just business anymore. It was about her taking charge of every aspect of our lives. At first, I chalked it up to her wanting to be involved in her son's life. After all, I figured she was his mother. But then, as time passed, I began to feel like I was being pushed aside. Luke, who had always been warm and affectionate, began to change too. It wasn't a huge shift at first, but I could sense a difference. I would ask him simple questions, and instead of the thoughtful answers I had come to expect, he would just nod and move on. It was as if he was beginning to pull away. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I felt the distance growing between us. Then came the honeymoon. My father, who had always wanted to give me the best of everything, had planned the most extravagant honeymoon for me and Luke. It was supposed to be the perfect trip to Switzerland, a place I had always dreamed of visiting. I was thrilled when my father presented the idea, and I couldn't wait to begin our married life in such a beautiful setting. I thought, this will be our time to get closer, to build the life we had promised each other. But then, Carla stepped in. I remember the day clearly. I was sitting in the living room when Carla arrived, as she often did. She wasted no time in making her feelings known. "Chloe, she said, her voice steady but cold. You will not be going on that honeymoon. It's time you learn the importance of being a wife, and that means focusing on your duties here at home. You're going to stay and take care of things around the house. I was shocked. What do you mean? I asked, confused by her sudden interference. My father planned this honeymoon for us. It's a gift. I can't just cancel it. Carla's eyes narrowed, and she didn't hesitate in her response. You'll stay home. That's your place now. Your father may have given you a honeymoon, but your responsibilities come first. Your duty is to this family, and I expect you to act like a proper wife. Her words stung, but I refused to back down. I looked at her and said firmly, No. I'm going on this honeymoon. My father gave it to us as a gift, and I won't let you take that away from me. That was when everything took a dark turn. I didn't know it at the time, but Carla's intentions were far more malicious than I could have ever imagined. Luke, instead of standing by my side, didn't say a word. He just quietly agreed with his mother. I could see the disappointment in his eyes, but he didn't speak up. The silence was deafening. And then my passport disappeared. I spent hours looking for it, tearing apart the house, thinking it was just misplaced. But when I couldn't find it, panic set in. Where could it be? It wasn't like me to lose something so important. When I finally checked the trash, my heart sank. There it was, half-burned, as if someone had deliberately destroyed it. My mind raced, and the only person I could think of who would do something like this was Carla. I was furious. The betrayal, the manipulation, everything about it was too much to handle. I called Luke, but it wasn't him who answered. It was Carla. Did you burn my passport? I demanded, my voice shaking with anger. Of course I did, she replied, her voice calm and cold. You'll stay home now, and you'll learn your place. Your father's plans don't matter anymore. This is what's best for Luke and me. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Luke, the man I had married, was complicit in this. The man I had trusted had let me down, just like his mother. They were in this together, and I was left alone, trapped in their game. I didn't know what to do, but I knew I couldn't stay there. I left our house and went straight to my father. The moment I walked in, I knew something had to change. What I didn't know was that this was only the beginning of a nightmare that would turn into something far more dangerous. The moment I stepped into my father's house, I felt a sense of urgency building inside me. I had to tell him everything. My mind was a whirlwind of anger, confusion, and disbelief. I couldn't even understand how things had gone so wrong so quickly. My father, David, had always been my rock. He had taught me the importance of trust, honesty, and integrity in business and life. Now, I was standing before him, the very man I had always looked up to, feeling completely betrayed by the woman who was supposed to become part of my family. When I explained everything to my father, his face grew pale. The rage in his eyes mirrored my own. He listened quietly as I recounted everything that had happened, from Carla's controlling behavior to Luke's strange indifference and the shocking betrayal of burning my passport. But the worst part, the part that made my stomach twist, was when I revealed the truth about the marriage. I told him about how Carla had manipulated the situation to strengthen her own business and ensure her son's future, using me as nothing more than a pawn in her game. David, a man who had built his success from the ground up, felt the sting of this revelation deeply. He trusted Carla. He thought she was a partner in more ways than one, someone he could rely on. But it turned out she had been hiding her true intentions all along. She had used her business partnership with my father as a stepping stone to gain leverage over our family, and ultimately, her son's marriage to me was nothing more than a means to an end. I can't believe this, my father muttered, pacing the room. I never thought she would do something like this. And Luke, he was complicit in all of it. I trusted him, Chloe. I trusted both of them. The pain in his voice was almost unbearable. I could see how deeply this betrayal had affected him. But it wasn't just about the personal hurt, it was about the impact on his business, and on me. It was about how Carla had completely manipulated everything. Her company had been struggling, and she saw our marriage as a way to secure her position, to make sure she and Luke were set for life. "Dad, they ruined everything," I said, my voice cracking. "They've played us for fools, and I don't know what to do anymore." David stopped pacing and looked at me with a serious expression. "We can't let this go on, Chloe. This isn't just about family anymore. This is business. We have to act, and we have to act fast." I nodded, finally feeling like there was a way forward. But I had no idea what was coming next. I had been so caught up in my own emotions that I hadn't realized just how deeply my father was planning to get involved. Over the next few days, we put our plan into motion. David was a strategic mastermind, and he knew exactly how to leverage his position to turn the tables. He wasn't going to let Carla's manipulation go unpunished. But the hardest part was that I had to make some difficult decisions. I had already filed for divorce, but it wasn't enough. David knew that if we wanted to truly hurt Carla and Luke, we had to do more than just end the marriage. We had to hit them where it would hurt the most, financially. I remember sitting with my father in his office, watching him make call after call, each one more calculated than the last. He was pulling strings I didn't even know existed. "I'm going to destroy their company, Chloe," he said coldly one evening. "We're going to make sure they lose everything." I was taken aback by his determination. I had never seen my father so focused, so intent on making someone pay for what they had done. But I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of relief. Carla had taken everything from me, my trust, my marriage, and my sense of security. Now my father was going to take it all away from her. "We're going to make sure their business is ruined," he continued. "They won't have a leg to stand on when we're done." It wasn't just about getting revenge anymore. It was about protecting our family's legacy and showing Carla that she couldn't mess with us. And so, David worked tirelessly behind the scenes, using every tool at his disposal to destabilize Carla's company. He knew the weaknesses, the cracks that were already forming, and he exploited them ruthlessly. It was as though he had become a different person, a man on a mission. But as I sat there, watching it all unfold, something inside me began to shift. I had never imagined that my father, the kind and generous man who had always been my protector, could be so ruthless. I wasn't sure how I felt about it. Part of me wanted to pull back, to stop everything before it went too far. But the other part of me, the part that had been hurt and betrayed, knew this was the only way to make them pay. I was scared, too. Scared of what would happen once the full extent of our plan came to fruition. What if everything went wrong? What if we were left with nothing? But I knew there was no turning back. We had crossed a line, and there was no going back now. As the days passed, David continued to execute his plan with precision. He knew exactly where to hit Carla's company, how to expose her weaknesses, and how to drain their finances. But even as the plan was unfolding, a sense of dread hung over me. I had no idea just how far this was going to go, or how deep the betrayal really went. The consequences of our actions were beginning to feel more real, and the deeper we went, the more I realized that our lives might never be the same again. Things moved fast after that. My father's plan began to work, but as it unfolded, the gravity of what was happening started to sink in. What had begun as an act of vengeance, a way to punish Carla and Luke for their betrayal, had quickly spiraled into something bigger, something far more dangerous. I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of detachment as the days passed. On one hand, I wanted to see them suffer the consequences of their actions, but on the other hand, I couldn't shake the guilt that gnawed at me. Was I becoming the very thing I despised? David had never been one to make rash decisions. He always planned meticulously, and with each passing day, I saw the fruits of his labor. He had expertly started to unravel the financial stability of Carla's company. He had started pulling the strings behind the scenes, carefully targeting her most vulnerable business relationships and draining her finances. I couldn't believe how quickly things were changing. It was almost as if my father had flipped a switch, and everything that Carla had worked so hard to build was collapsing around her. But even as we watched her company crumble, I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling inside. It was like I was looking at a picture of our lives that was fading away. The people I had trusted, the man I had married, and the woman who had been a second mother to me, all of them were slipping through my fingers. And somehow, I couldn't stop it. Weeks went by, and each day Carla seemed to sink deeper into despair. I had heard about the struggles she was facing, how her business was losing deals left and right, how creditors were knocking at her door. David had kept me updated on everything, but I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry for her. After all, she had manipulated me, used my trust as a tool for her own gain. I had every right to feel this way. But as her empire began to collapse, it wasn't just her company that was at risk. It was everything. Luke, too, was caught in the fallout. The man I had married was not the man I thought he was. When I first met him, I believed he was the charming, sweet man I saw on the surface. But with every passing day, I realized just how deeply he was entangled in his mother's web of lies. His silence, his refusal to stand up for me, it all made sense now. He had never been on my side. He had been playing the game, right alongside his mother, and now, both of them were losing. One afternoon, I was sitting with my father, and I could see the exhaustion in his eyes. He had worked tirelessly to execute his plan, and it was all coming to fruition. Carla was losing everything, her business, her money, her reputation. But then, something changed. I could see it in my father's face. He wasn't just focused on taking her down anymore. There was something more, a darker motivation. And I realized, with a cold chill running through my veins, that my father wasn't just destroying Carla for what she had done to me. He was doing it because of what she had done to him. "Chloe, we're not just going to ruin their company," he said one evening, his voice steady but firm. "We're going to make sure they lose everything. It's the only way to teach them a lesson. If they want to play dirty, we'll show them how it's done." I didn't know what to think. Part of me wanted to pull away from all of this, to just walk away and start fresh. But the other part of me, the part that had been betrayed, couldn't let it go. I had already lost so much.
Luke. Carla.
The life I thought I would have. There was no going back now. As my father's plan reached its peak, Carla's life began to fall apart in the most public way. I watched as her company was forced into bankruptcy, the headlines blasting her failure for the whole world to see. The press wasn't kind to her, and it seemed like everything she had worked so hard for had come crashing down in an instant. But even as I watched her lose it all, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. I had once admired her. I had once seen her as a role model, a woman who knew how to take control of her life. Now, she was nothing more than a shadow of the person she used to be. It was as though all of her success had been built on lies, and now, she was paying the price for it. Luke, too, had started to show signs of breaking. The pressure was getting to him. The man who had once seemed so confident and secure in our marriage now seemed lost, broken, and defeated. He couldn't hide from the truth anymore. His mother's greed and manipulation had ruined him, just as it had ruined her. And in the end, he had nowhere to turn. One evening, as I was sitting alone, contemplating everything that had happened, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway. It was Luke. "Chloe," he said, his voice hoarse. "I need to talk to you." I felt a coldness spread through me as I heard his voice. I had no idea what he was going to say, but I knew it wasn't going to be good. "You've lost everything, Luke," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "You and your mother. You've destroyed everything. What else do you want from me?" He was quiet for a long moment before he spoke again. "I never meant for any of this to happen, Chloe. I never wanted to hurt you. But my mother, she's been pulling the strings all along. I was just too weak to stop her." I could hear the defeat in his voice, and it made something inside me snap. I had no sympathy left for him. The man who had once promised to love and cherish me had sided with his mother in this cruel game. Now they were both paying the price. And, as much as it hurt to admit, I didn't care anymore. "You've made your choice, Luke," I said, my words final. "And now, you'll have to live with the consequences." As the line went dead, I realized that this was the end of it all. My marriage was over. Carla's empire was crumbling. Luke had lost his way. And for the first time, I felt a strange sense of relief. The weight of their betrayal was finally starting to lift. But even as I felt free, I knew this wasn't the end of the story. There was still more to come, and I had no idea just how far this would go. The days following my conversation with Luke were a blur. It was like everything in my life had shifted into high gear, and there was no way to slow it down. Carla's downfall was nearing its peak, and Luke, once the man I thought I could trust, had become a mere shadow of the person he used to be. Everything had spiraled out of control, and there was no going back. My father's actions had already set things in motion, and within a matter of weeks, everything Carla and Luke had worked for was crumbling. The company Carla had spent years building was slowly being dismantled, and it was clear that there was no way for them to recover. David had struck at the heart of their finances, exploiting every vulnerability Carla had left exposed. He was ruthless, but to be honest, I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry for them. They had brought this upon themselves. One day, I received a call from my father. "Chloe," he said, his voice calm but full of purpose. "It's done. The company's finished. Carla and Luke have lost everything." I had expected this, but hearing it confirmed was still a shock. The company was gone. The assets had been seized, the accounts drained. Carla, who had once stood at the top of her game, was now facing the consequences of her greed and manipulation. The headlines were everywhere: business failures, scandals, and public humiliation. There was no escaping the truth now. The world knew what she had done. But even as I felt a sense of justice, I couldn't deny the emptiness that lingered. My marriage had ended, my trust in people was shattered, and everything I had worked so hard to build with Luke had been destroyed. What did I have left? Was this the price I had to pay for standing up for myself? Luke tried reaching out to me again, but I didn't answer. I knew his apologies were empty. The man I married was gone, replaced by someone who was too weak to stand up to his mother and too selfish to care about me. When I did hear from him, it was when he was at his lowest, calling from a dingy apartment, pleading for forgiveness. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen, Chloe." His voice was thick with emotion. "I didn't want to lose you." But I had no patience left for his excuses. "You had every chance to stand by me, Luke. But you didn't. You chose your mother's control over our marriage, and now you've lost everything. Don't call me again." I hung up the phone and felt a strange weight lift from my chest. It was as if, in that moment, I was finally free. Not just from the lies, the manipulation, and the pain, but free from the relationship that had never been what I had hoped it would be. The next few weeks were spent sorting through the wreckage of my life. I was determined not to let it consume me. My father, ever the pillar of strength, was supportive but also silent on the matter of my next steps. He had already won, and in a way, so had I. But the cost of victory was far too high. Eventually, I made the decision to leave the city. The gossip had already spread, and people whispered about my failed marriage and the financial collapse of Carla's company. I didn't need to be surrounded by the constant reminder of my past. With my father's help, I was transferred to another branch of his company, far from the mess that had become my life. Starting over wasn't easy. It never is. But I had my work, my dignity, and a fresh chance at life. I could rebuild, piece by piece. And while I knew the road ahead wouldn't be without its challenges, I also knew that I was stronger than I had ever been. As for Carla and Luke, they were left with nothing. Their company was bankrupt, their reputation destroyed, and their dream shattered. Luke, once so full of promise, was now a mere shadow of himself. He had no one left to blame but himself and his mother. I had gotten my revenge, but it wasn't the triumph I expected. It wasn't the sweet victory of watching my enemies fall. It was just the bitter end of a chapter in my life that I had to close. But as I sat in my new office, looking out at the city skyline, I knew that this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning of something new. And for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of peace. I had fought for myself, and I had won. I had reclaimed my life, and now I was ready for whatever came next.